Welcome everyone to this last talk in the morning session. What I'm going to do is I will just do a follow-up of what I was presenting. I guess it was in November when we were presenting like the first ideas of our project. So I continued to work on this concept of radical hope. And what are my preliminary findings? We can say that before the 60s, there was mainly a theological interest in the concept of hope, because hope is a theological virtue. So theologians were discussing this concept, but it was almost missing in psychology, also in philosophy. And what we can see now is that right now there's an intensive discussion about hope within different disciplines, but it's rather limited to the single disciplines, and there's not a lot of interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary talk going on. Basically, we can distinguish two broad accounts. On the one hand, you could consider hope, or certain scholars are seeing hope as a kind of core of the conditio humana. So they would just say it's part of being human to have this attitude towards hope. And you have other scholars saying that it's rather a social construct, so people just learn it. And if they don't have learned it from the social environment, then it's also hard for them to maintain hope in times of hardship and so on. And within these two accounts, this personal account or this anthropological account and this social constructivist account, you have many different conceptualizations of hope. And yeah, I was looking at one recent meta-study doing an analysis of more than 250 articles where the concept of hope is like studied properly. It's not only mentioned or a subtopic, but it's really the main focus of the article in 11 different fields of study. And the authors just they develop at least 8 different concepts of hope. They say among these, if you just look at these articles and in the different fields, then there are at least 8 different main features which are associated with hope. So you can see that right now the concept is intensively discussed, but it's also very broad, and there are different conceptualizations which have partial overlaps, but there's not, so to say, some core features everyone agrees on. The classical concept or the classical definition of hope, coming mainly from philosophy, includes at least 2 components. On the one hand, you have a certain belief, and on the other hand, you have a certain desire. There's the belief that a certain state of affairs D may or may not obtain in the future, and then there is the desire that this state of affair should obtain in the future. Now the problem is that philosophers are criticizing this concept of hope because they say that's just a very superficial understanding of hope, because there must also be a confidence. It doesn't suffice just to have this cognitive state and to have this conative desire, but to hope means also that you have a certain confidence that this state of affairs has a good chance of obtaining, even if there are some difficulties or obstacles, because otherwise you would not self-regulate your own mind in such a way that you find also pathways. Snyder, a psychologist working on hope, he talks about agentive pathways that you have to detect in order to realize this state of affairs someone is desiring. So an example might be a cancer patient who has this hope that he will be healed, and therefore he acts in favor of this desired outcome, and he's not discouraged, although from an objective or neutral perspective, the probability is very low that with this diagnosis he will be healed. So this would be this substantial concept of hope, that I long or I'm oriented towards this desired state, even though there are obstacles, even though from a neutral perspective the probability that this desired state of affairs will obtain are very low. Now, you might say that this desired state of affairs can take on two forms. On the one hand, you might say, I know rather well what I'm desiring for, so this D, that desired state, is rather clear and precise. But there might also be the case that you're desiring something, but you have no clear vision what you are desiring. So this would be this second version, that D is more awake future state, and you just have this positive open pro attitude towards a positive future state, even though you don't know exactly what this state will consist in. And now you might say, if you lose hope that P, that a certain state of affairs obtains, involves also adopting a different attitude toward that state. For instance, by saying I'm resigned to the fact that P will not happen. So I lose this specific hope because I think the probabilities are too low, and so I'm just resigning from desiring this state of affairs. And now the question, or my question is it also possible for a person to lose all one's specific hopes? And does this mean that then hope in general is gone? Or is there still some other form of, like a more basic form of hope that could still be maintained, which would be this positive orientation towards the future, even though you don't have this more precise vision what this future state will consist in? So I would distinguish between losing hopes and losing hope. Losing hopes means that you're not, that you just resign from hoping that certain states of affairs will obtain because you estimate that the probabilities are too low. And losing hope would mean that you're just, like any form of positive pro-attitude towards the future would also be gone. And this story I was referring to in my last talk of the story that Jonathan Lear is reporting about this tribe, this Indian tribe of the Crow, and due to the historical circumstances, due to of oppression, they lost their traditional way of life. And so Jonathan Lear is saying this tribe had to face the challenge that their familiar practices of living a Crow way of life, that this world was just gone. They were brought to a reservation. They could not follow the traditional pattern of life anymore. So basically, how they understood traditional, what it means to lead a Crow life, this opportunities or also a positive pro-orientation towards leading such a life in the future was just gone because it was not possible anymore in the reservation. And so we might say that in this case, all the possibilities to lose one, or all the possibilities to have specific hopes have been lost due to a breakdown of intelligibly understanding what it means to lead a Crow life under these new oppressed and restricted circumstances. So we might say that the Crow, they recognized that it doesn't make sense to hope that this traditional way of living a crow life is still possible in the future. And so now Jonathan Lear poses this question: does this amount, like this very dire and negative outlook towards the future, does this also mean that the crow lost all kinds of hope? Is this losing hope and not just losing hopes? And the answer that Jonathan Lear gives, or at least that's his suggestion, is no. There is still a form of hope that remains, or that remained also that remained alive within the tribe, and that's what he calls radical hope, because this radical hope is directed at a future, at a positive future, even though right now the tribe did not have any conceptual resources to understand how this positive future might look like. So that's basically the main focus of my research, is to understand better this concept of radical hope. So we might say that radical hope just means that due to some very negative circumstances, it is impossible to predict how the future will develop, but there is still this capacity to have a positive fundamental orientation towards a good future, even though without being able to conceptualize this future state of affair. We find this, at least certain similar notions, already in the literature before Jonathan Lear and before this term of the radical hope was coined. For instance, Godfrey writes, "The best preliminary characterization of fundamental hope is as an openness of spirit with respect to the future. This means, in relation to an ultimate hope," he talks of ultimate hope, "or its contrary, one does not deny evidence or miscalculate it, one faces up to the evidence. But openness also means a sense of the limits of evidence. One knows the difference between this cause is lost and all is lost." So radical hope, I would say, is not an intentional state with some specific content, but rather a kind of general orientation or sense of how things are within the world, in the context of which intentional states of a more specific kind, like "I hope that B can obtain," are possible. So I would say that this concept of radical hope provides a kind of general framework or general orientation within which the more specific form of hopes can be developed and maintained. Now, as indicated, a defining feature of this mode of radical hoping is to transcend imagination or every kind of specific representation. So we might say that such a kind of basic hopeful orientation includes something like basic trust, a basic trust towards the world, a trust in ourselves, a trust in a community and the underlying goodness of the world. Then hope seems to come along with a feeling of safety and security. For instance, the hope to experience security of and in one's being. Then hope seems to, this radical hope seems to instill also patience, because we don't know when this positive future state of affairs will obtain. So one has to be patient, one has to overcome the present challenges and hardship. And for instance, Gabriel Marcel, I found some quotes in his reflection of hope. He was a Christian-oriented philosopher, and he says that, he doesn't talk about radical hope, but he talks about this basic positive outlook towards the world, and he says such a positive outlook in his religious interpretation means that I have I put my hope like in God or in some transcendent good reality. So he says at the end, all boils down to sentences like, I hope in thee for us. So it's not us. We cannot hope that we will make things straight, but we can just put it in some transcendental reality. So I found this interesting, that you have, like, at least in the theological literature, there is at least a certain sense of this radical hope, which of course then is also interpreted theologically. Now, the idea is, if you don't go for this theological interpretation, then you might say that radical hope could also be a kind of existential dimension of the human condition. So the idea is that radical hope is not something, as Jonathan Lear is presenting it, that it was this crow chief, Plenty Cups. He had this attitude of radical hope, and because of this attitude, he managed to lead the Crow tribe into a better future and to overcome all these difficulties the tribe was facing. But the idea would be that radical hope is something that many of us have, or it's part of our existential condition, at least implicitly. So, like, if you look at Heidegger, for instance, and his idea of being at home in the world, or that Dasein means also that someone has a positive feeling that we can arrange a good life within this world, that there's a general sense that things might turn out for the good, then this attitude of radical hope, which Jonathan Lear is describing, would not just be a special gift referring to very special people, but it would be something that all of us, or at least most of us, would have. It would be part of this human condition. So radical hope means that someone trusts in a world that is basically conceived to be meaningful, and despair would then be the experience that this meaningful future life is not seen anymore. It's a world devoid of meaningful possibilities. Now, having this radical hope does not mean that it cannot be shattered, or that it cannot crumble in difficult situations. I think this quote from Jean Amery might point into this direction. Amery is describing his torture in a SS prison, and he writes, whoever has succumbed to torture can no longer feel at home in the world. The shame of destruction cannot be erased. Trust in the world which already collapsed in part at the first blow, but in the end, under torture, fully will not be regained. So what I don't want to say is that this basic orientation, this existential orientation of being at home in the world cannot be shattered, and it is a very fragile existential condition, but still I would, or that's at least an idea I would like to pursue, is that it's not something very special for few people, but it's something that belongs rather to us, to us being human. Now, these are basically my ideas. They are very much also informed by philosophical literature. Now, going through these different papers and literature, I made also a few adjustments, since Gina was also telling us that we should more focus on that part. So one of the assumptions I had was that spirituality is positively correlated with hope, because Jonathan Lear, in his book, he talks also that this chief of the crow, he had a deep spiritual experience here. He had a dream vision about this positive future of the crow tribe, and it seems that this spiritual experience was very important for him to carry him through all this hardship. Now, looking at the psychological literature, I found out that it's unclear. At least there are some studies suggesting that spirituality is a source of hope, or that different psychological measures for hope, that they are positively correlated with people who have also a spiritual or who lead a spiritual life. But other studies are indicating that these might rather be independent constructs. For instance, in one study of Hallman et al., the findings suggest that hope fosters post-traumatic growth, but spirituality apparently doesn't. So there's no positive correlation, at least in this study. So what I will do in my research is I will suspend this focus on how spirituality might be connected with radical hope for two reasons. On the one hand, the literature does not support a strong interconnection or correlation, so it's just vague how these concepts, if at all, how they are interrelated. And I think it would also be overload my research, so I want to tie it rather to this core concept of radical hope. Then concerning questions and future directions, one question I still have, and I have to inquire further, is whether there is this connection between radical hope and you might call it existential trust in the world. So I would like to explore in more depth this concept of existential feeling coming from phenomenology, like philosophy, but also psychology with certain leanings towards phenomenology. So, and I will also check studies regarding the connection between trust and hope. To be honest, I didn't find so much, at least for now, that there are studies really looking into this interconnection. Then a second question I have is whether trust in the world involves a kind of belief to be entitled to well-being and safety. That is a question which came up because I was reading some literature where post-traumatic growth seems to be correlated with a sense of entitlement and gratitude, so that people just say, I am entitled to have a good life, to have a good future, and this seems to have a positive impact on post-traumatic growth. So I was wondering whether such a belief in entitlement, how this fits into this concept of radical hope, in the sense that I might say my radical hope comes along with this entitlement, that I have a right to have a good future. And then a third question I have is the relationship between hope and positive self-deception, especially in studies investigating the role of hope within mainly cancer patients or patients with very severe diseases or terminal illness. There you find very often that people hope that they will be healed, or that they will live much longer, as the average life expectancy indicates. And here there seems to be a positive correlation between this hopeful attitude, positive self-deception, and autonomy, right? Because even though I'm deceiving myself about my present state, because I'm hoping that I will be healed, that I will survive longer, as statistics say, and so on, then this gives me also a certain sense of autonomy. It makes me more autonomy. It gives me a sense of control over my life. So that's also something I would like to study in more depth, because I think that radical hope comes along or might come along with self-deception, but it might also have a positive impact of autonomy. And then the more autonomous you are, the more pathways you might find to overcome this difficult situation. And a last question I have, or a direction for future research, is if you look at the literature of hope, then as I said at the beginning, either hope is construed as an individual, a personal experience, or it is more construed as a context-dependent process. And now my question would be, how do they interrelate? In what sense can I maintain as an individual a positive, hopeful attitude if my social context or my environment in general is very hostile to this attitude and is constantly undermining it? So how are like these two concepts interrelated? And I found a few papers dealing with this concept of radical hope in the context of like psychology dealing with empowerment, psychology dealing with like people of color being oppressed. So most of the studies are referring to African American communities, and where this concept of radical hope is used to overcome forms of marginalization, oppression. So there is this socio-political dimension in this concept. And here my question would be, in what sense this context, this social context, is also important for fostering, for nourishing radical hope, especially by looking at such concepts of ancestral pride, collective memories. Because if you look at how Jonathan Lear is presenting radical hope in the Crow tribe, then I think that also the past, like the glorious past of the Crows, played a very important role, so that they had this idea, even though we face now this time of hardship, we have been a tribe that can be proud of the past. And so that seems to be also one source that this attitude of radical hope could be carried on. So there was especially one paper of Mosley from 2019 is more dealing with this political impact of radical hope. Yeah, so that was my short presentation, or just the ideas I have, and these are the references.
When we have time for 2 or 3 questions, Markus?
Yeah, I found this is a very important concept of radical hope, or let's say the phenomenon is important. If the term is a good one, well, I don't know. I relate very much to Basic Trust of Erikson. I don't know if Lear has ever read Erikson.
You were making this suggestion, at least in the quote, like in the references, Erikson is not present.
It's a pity.
Yeah.
And even more than a pity.
Yeah.
Neglection, I would even say. Well, you started by the interesting differentiation that different theories do. One say it's a conditio humana to have the tendency to hope, and others say, well, it depends when you didn't learn from others, it's hard to hope. Well, this is basically the reason why Julius Kuhl came up with PSI theory in personality psychology, because personality psychology was much dominated by the trait approach, saying it's either this way, it's either that way. And it's also coming up when Amber says, oh, well, there are autistic people who are over-empathetic, others are not. How can we explain that? Well, it's not a trait, or let's say a trait is a sensitivity of an internal system. And we have several internal systems that can be active or can be non-active. In the case of hope, we could say, well, the system that does, when it's one system is active, we show hope. When another system is active, which is more focused on discrepancies, we are more negative. Yeah, so we can switch, but people differ in the degree to how readily they can activate a system, although another one, for example, is currently active or even dominant. So there are at least two systems. We can also relate them to the reactive and predictive system parts. One is more focused on discrepancies, or let's say on discordance, so orientation. And another one is more focused on concordance or congruency. And this is, for example, already when you try to simulate or model them on the computer. So one is more this symbolic sequential modeling, and the other one, which we have in AI now, is the neural networks connectionist modeling. The connectionist modeling basically is based on the principle of this congruency orientation. So connectionist networks look for congruency. So kind of, is this similar to that? Yeah, and this is, let's say, a cognitive basis of hope. Is what I can expect from the future, has it similarities with my wishes, with my expectations? And discrepancy focus is, where are the differences? How are other people different from me? Which is also a basis for racism. But also for not hoping. It will not come out as my wish is. So, and it depends on which system is currently active. If you are looking for similarities, how does the world fit to me, to my wishes, to my desires, and will it not work out? And so it's a constant competition between these let's call it neurobiological, neuropsychological systems, and which could give an answer to, well, one person is like this, one person, no. They all have these systems, and the question is, how can we activate them? They can be, let's say, deactivated by the experience that we made from other people saying, oh no, more pessimist people or more optimist. And
More German people.
More German people maybe. Optimism basically is more a construct that was kept in psychology rather than hope. Let's say 60 or more years ago, they had this tendency to get rid of the more everyday language, like the will, hope, and so on, and try to keep more the Fremdwörter to make it sound more scientific. Exactly. So, but it stayed in, but not the word stayed in the psychological research.
Just a short remark, like Erickson, so he's still a major reference point in developmental psychology and so on, right?
Definitely.
One more question. Yes.
So I have a number of things that we can talk later on, but one, can you go back to the thing, I think the second thing you were curious about, looking at this, so like the future directions, so the trust in the world thing and the relation between hope and self-deception and so on. This study that I referenced, and I can send it to you in my talk about our predictions and perceptions of post-traumatic growth, a form of ultimate justice reasoning, stuff might be relevant for you, because they found that people who judged that when they thought about other people and when they thought about themselves, when they judged that the person was deserving of post-traumatic growth, then they also predicted that they were more likely to experience post-traumatic growth. And so there is, and so then they kind of conclude that this can be a way, reporting post-traumatic growth can be a way of coping with perceived injustice and so on. And so that might get at some of your some of your questions there. One question I have, I don't know if you can answer it now, is the relationship of your radical hope to Kierkegaardian notions of the night of infinite resignation and the night of faith and theology, right? This guy who kind of gives up the possibility of all of these things, with sort of the trust that he's going to get them all back again. And so you have, to some extent, an admission of impossibility with the trust that you're getting it back by, by virtue of the absurd or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I guess the question that I have for you is how much... So in the philosophy of hope, right, a lot of the talk is like, you have to at least have belief in the possibility, right? And then this radical hope kind of throws a wrench in some of these things, right? But how much loss of possibility, as it were, or loss of belief in possibility, do you think like regular hope can maintain before it sort of ceases to be hope? So, someone who says, I think that God is logically impossible, like not just like nomologically and metaphysically, but like logically impossible, but I hope that I'm wrong, right? Or if you think that something is sort of really, 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 really unlikely, and not in this sort of dumb and dumber sense of like, so you're saying there's a chance, right? But rather like you really take seriously the impossibility or near impossibility of something, and yet, can you, do you think, continue to hope? Like, how much loss of belief in possibility do you think hope can tolerate?
I mean, of course, that's a difficult question because it goes into the rationality of hope and the discrimination, the distinction between hope and wishful thinking.
Yeah,
that would generally be the distinction. So wishful thinking would be, I will win the lottery, right? I cannot hope to win the lottery, but I can wish to, although it's not impossible. If I buy a ticket, it's not an impossibility to win the lottery, but the chances are so low that people would say that's wishful thinking because you have not any, you cannot somehow positively relate to this. That's the classical, like Petit and others, they would say that's just wishful thinking. The probability must be below being just a metaphysical possibility. That's not enough for hope. There must be a certain realistic chance that this desired state of affair.
Rational hope.
Yeah, rational hope means I can find pathways to make this happen.
Because in the literature on wishful thinking and self-deception, those are usually identified with beliefs that something is the case as opposed to hoping that something is the case. And then irrational hope is not wishful thinking, but rather just irrational hope. Like it's the state of hoping that's irrational, not.
Yeah, like in the psychology, they would like Schneider, he's like the big guy of the psychology of hope, and he talks always about agentive pathways. So hope includes that I have at least an idea how this future state of affairs I want to obtain, how I can make it happen. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking.
But then I can't hope for heaven, or I can't hope for my kidnapped child being returned to me because I can't.
Yeah, but but if you
really hope it happens.
Well, I guess. The kidnapped child, if it wasn't. I guess he would say if it was kidnapped recently, if the police is like looking for the kidnappers, if there's a decent chance that the kid might be found, then that's still hoping. But if the child was kidnapped like 15 years ago, no traces, no signs, then there are no pathways how you can find the child anymore.
There has to be a pathway for me.
At least you have to be able to conceptualize a kind of realistic pathway. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking.